Hello and welcome to the Quarantined Wargamer. I'm Big Lee, and today I wanted to discuss my 4-coat varnish method. So over many years I've had lots of questions about how and why I varnish the way I do, and in fact I had a couple of conversations in the last few weeks which has sort of prompted me to do this video where I'm going to tell you how and why I varnish for my models 4 times. Now, I'm not for a second suggesting that this is a definitive method or that my way is the best way. It's just what I've developed over many years of painting. It works for me. It does take a lot of patience, it has to be said. It takes a long time to varnish models, but I do find that what I'm left with is a model that looks the way I want it to look, but is also tough enough to last being handled around on the war games table. So again, I hasten to add, this is not a definitive method. It's just the one that works for me, and I thought I'd share it with you. So before we sort of discuss the actual method itself, I thought I'd run through some of the thinking that led to the development of that method. So let's start by saying, why do we varnish at all? Well, obviously to protect the paintwork, of course, particularly if we're going to be handling models as wargamers will be. Acrylics will dry hard, they're quite tough. But handling, banging against each other, just minor accidents will chip that paint. And so you put a coat of varnish over the top that will seal that model, protect the paintwork, and make your figures look as good as they can be for as long as possible. Now obviously the amount of damage that your figure might pick up will largely depend on how you store them. If you're storing them in a damp location, for instance, or if you just pile them all in a box one on top of the other, they're going to get damaged. And the sort of varnishing that you put on your model will be determined by the environment in which you're going to store your figures. So I would say that because my wargaming figures are going to get handled a lot and therefore have to be exposed to more bumps and chips, because I'm a ham-fisted fella and I do tend to knock stuff over. That's why I put 4 coats of varnish on my models. Now other people, if you're painting a model just to go on display, for instance, you're not going to need 4 coats of varnish. You're just going to need something to seal your model in, protect that paintwork a little bit, and then you put it away in your cabinet for display. Job done. But if you're like me and you're going to be handling those figures, you're going to want something a little bit more robust. Now, I would always say that varnishing, for me, always starts at the primer. If your figure's painting isn't adhered properly onto the metal or the plastic or resin or whatever it is you're painting in, then the top coat of varnish is not really going to help a lot, because if the paintwork isn't properly adhered to the figure, you're going to have problems further down the line. So I always make sure that my figures are cleaned properly and primed properly before painting them, because then when I do get to that top coat of varnishing, or top coats of varnishing, the model is as strong and as protected as it possibly can be, particularly as I've already said, going to be handling them a lot on the games table. So the next question you're going to ask yourself is, what sort of finish do you want? Is it going to be gloss, satin or matte? Now, once upon a time, back in the mists of time, you would have expected to see these gentlemen wargamers of bygone years playing with their figures, and they would all be painted in a nice shiny gloss coat, pretty much the old toy soldier style, which was fine at the time. But developments in the technology of matte varnishes, for instance, have made spray, or mattes in particular, very, very good. And of course it's an aesthetic thing as well, so that over the last, 20, 30, maybe more years, there's been a general shift towards matte varnishes. And nowadays you go around a war game show, nearly all the figures on display have got a matte finish to them. Not all, and that's fine, but the vast majority are. That tends to be the aesthetic quality that people want these days. So, do you prefer spray on varnish or brush on varnish? Now I am very much someone who prefers spray on varnish for various reasons, which I'll go into. First and foremost, spray varnish is very quick. You can do multiple models at the same time, and I find that if you don't overdo it, you can put a very thin coat of varnish on, so it's a lot easier to control, and then you can put multiple layers on to build it up to the thickness of varnish that you want on your figure. The other reason I prefer spray on varnishes is that sometimes when I've used brush on varnishes, you can actually damage the paintwork, particularly if you've got delicate colours or you've used washes. It is possible that brush on will actually dissolve some of that wash and then you end up with streaky colours or areas where the wash has been wiped off by the brushing action and putting on the varnish. So I prefer using a spray. Now some people would prefer to use the old polyurethane type varnishes that you can get from a DIY store. I know that's the preferred method of some more well-known famous painters. That does require a little bit of skill because you know, you've got to do a little bit of mixing and so on. But the advantage with those type of varnishes is that they are tougher, very, very tough. And they're very cheap actually for the quantity that you're getting. Of course, the downside are that manufacturers change their formula for their varnishes, so what might work with one pot might not work with another. And the other thing is some of those varnishes can yellow a bit with age, so you have to be very careful. Obviously, in the miniatures hobby, there's lots of brands of proper miniatures paint out there, varnish rather, out there, and you know, they've been formulated to not turn yellow with age. And as I say, with spray cans you can very much control the amount that's going onto your model. At least that's my experience. So finally, let's get round to telling you what my method is. Now this has evolved out of years of practice and trial and error, and it's just the way that I do it now. I do it with pretty much all of my models. So first things first, I let the model dry thoroughly. And that means perhaps putting it near a radiator or leaving it in a nice warm room, and then just giving it plenty of time for that paint to thoroughly dry. The paint and any washes that you've put on last perhaps. So making sure that it's thoroughly dry. Obviously if it's just in a room sat on your paint desk, then leave it longer than you would if you're in a nice warm room or near a radiator or something like that. When the model is thoroughly dry and you're happy that it's ready to be gloss varnished, gloss coated, the first thing I do is I will give my models one quick thin coat of gloss, and then again I let that dry thoroughly. Now again, it will vary depending on the temperature of the room, so it does require some patience. And then many people would then move on to their matte coats after that. Well, I don't. I always give my models a second gloss coat of spray varnish. Again, nice and thin, but enough on top of the other layer means that model has been properly sealed. And again, let it dry thoroughly, so yet more patience is required. And then now that I consider the model thoroughly sealed, now it's ready for its top coats of varnish. Now these are the matte ones, so I'll normally give the models a top coat varnish of matte spray. Again, let it dry, it takes a long time, making sure that it's thoroughly dry before then going on perhaps with a better quality matte varnish, and I'll actually talk about the brands in a minute. And then finally, there's actually a fifth stage to this, is picking out any wet or shiny areas with some brush on gloss. So for instance, on figures with wet lips or gemstones or shiny armour, or obviously patches of water, I might go back over them with a nice shiny gloss so that they look wet or shiny. So the brands of varnish that you use is very much down to personal taste. My personal favourites, actually, after a bit of trial and error, is actually I really like the Winsor & Newton spray varnishes. So for instance, they've got a couple of different versions of their high gloss varnish. This is the stuff, I put a couple of coats of those on, nice and strong. I find it produces a really strong sealing coat that thoroughly protects the model. And this does the heavy lifting and protecting the paintwork. And then over that I tend to use one of their matte varnishes. Again, Winsor & Newton, not particularly cheap but very readily available. I always have, there's no problem me finding that down my local art shop or in some DIY stores. Some stationery stores will still sell this. This is my preferred first matte coat, and then usually I will go over it with a better quality matte coat once that first coat's dry, and I tend to use Tester's Dull Coat. Now this, my experience, now I could be wrong, there could be other brands out there, but in my experience this is the best dull coat out there. I've tried a few other brands that I didn't like, and I always end up coming back to this. It's expensive because it's a small can, but very, very good. And then, as I've already said, I will then go back and pick out certain areas of a model. So I might use, you know, just a typical artist's gloss varnish. I just happen to use the Winsor & Newton Galleria range, but I mean it could be any shiny, any decent gloss, because it's literally just for picking out pieces. And then occasionally, very occasionally, I might actually use the brush on dull coat lacquer. I have to be really careful with this, because this does have a tendency, if not used if a model hasn't already been sealed, there's a tendency to dissolve the paint and any washes that you put on the model, so I have to be really careful with that, but I do occasionally use that. But they're just the brands that I've used. I've used various other brands. I won't go badmouth any of them, but I've used some and they've turned out to be complete rubbish. I bought some cheap varnishes before. They just don't work. I always end up returning back to the Winsor & Newton stuff. For me, it's the best ones that I can get my hands on. You may have other examples, and I'd love to hear other brands that I may not have tried. I can always give them a whirl. So leave them in the comments, obviously, below. So that's my method. I don't know what you think of that, but that's the method that I've developed over many years. At the end of the day, we varnish to protect the paintwork, and this is the method that works for me. It produces the results that I want. I'm very much someone who prefers a matte varnish. The flatter the better, which is why I really like the dull coat spray. It produces a really lovely flat. It doesn't affect the colouring, doesn't look frosted in any way, but it produces a lovely flat finish, so I really do like that. I do have favourite brands, we probably all do, but at the end of the day, the main key is ease of availability, and of course expense. Some people can't afford to spend vast sums of money on varnish, and I get through a lot. With 4 coats of varnish, I get through a lot, and I tend to stock up during the summer months, when strangely sometimes there's always a sale on at my local hobby store, and I always manage to pick up. So whenever there's a sale on, I'll stock up, and it's a large outlay of money on cans of spray varnish, and I do get some funny looks from the cashiers, but it's good to stock up when you can, because like I say, they're quite an expensive item, but an essential one. Why put all that effort into painting your model if you're not going to then protect the paintwork, particularly if it's a wargaming figure that's going to get handled a lot. I'd love to hear what you think. Do you have a preferred way of doing it? Do you have preferred brands that you'd rather use? Do you swear by a particular method that is different from mine? I'd love to hear. Please, put some comments below, as always, or over on my blog, Big Lee's Miniature Adventures. So that just leaves me to say, if you've enjoyed the video, please hit the like button, and of course consider subscribing to my channel. So until next week, I hope everyone's getting in as many games as they can, staying safe, and of course keep rolling high.